I believe most buyers make the biggest real estate decision within a few minutes. Not because they don't do enough research, in fact it's the opposite. They spend months, if it's not years, studying the market, comparing areas and developers, watching prices, following supply and demand, trying to predict the future growth. And of course, this due diligence is good and essential. But when the launch day arrives, that's when the real game begins. And the pressure starts to build. And the closing techniques starts to appear. Scarcity, urgency, fear of missing out, and things like don't miss this opportunity, first come, first serve, only a few units left, or take whatever available. And before you know it, you're no longer evaluating the investment. Instead, you are reacting to the pressure. And the same person who spent months studying and analyzing the market suddenly spends seconds choosing the one thing they will actually live with. The exact plot, the exact street, and the exact location. And I believe that's completely backwards. Because markets don't reward every property equally. Instead, specific units outperform others. And the reason has nothing to do with the property itself, especially when we're talking about villa. But it's a start with a plot of land underneath it. Now, let's test this idea. Now let's imagine you're acquiring 5-bedroom type A villa in Avelia at the Valley by Emaar. Same budget, same developer, same floor plan, and same community. Only one variable changes in this equation, which is the plot location. And in this case study, we're comparing plot 20 versus plot 60. Here is something that surprises most buyers. If I removed the plot numbers and showed you these villas, most people wouldn't know which one to choose. Because on paper, they're almost identical. Same villa, same type, same floor plan, same architecture, same developer, and same budget as well. So the question, why could one become much better home to live in compared to the other? Because here is the mistake. Most people or most buyers evaluate the building or evaluate the property itself. But architects, yes, they evaluate the property itself, but also they evaluate everything around it. Architects, they don't just study the property itself, but they study and analyze its relation with the sun, parks, roads, pedestrian, privacy, noise, along with many others. Because home doesn't exist in isolation. In fact, it exists within an environment, and that environment quietly shapes how you experience it every single day. And that's truly the invisible difference. You're not choosing between two different villas or two different properties, but you are choosing between two completely different ways of living. And the interesting part, most of these differences remains completely invisible until the day you move in. There is one thing buyers almost never ask about it, yet they'll experience it almost every single morning, and also developers rarely advertise it. However, the architects immediately look for it, which is the sun. Now imagine this. You open your curtains, and instead of harsh afternoon heat, your garden is filled with soft morning sunlight, and suddenly breakfast outside becomes enjoyable, and the garden gets used more often. The outdoor space feels more comfortable. Even your air conditioning works a little less, year after year. That's the power and importance of orientation. Not because it looks better on the launch day, but because it quietly improves everyday life. And here is the interesting part. Nothing about this makes plot 20 looks more valuable. But over the next decades, it makes it feel far more valuable to live in. And that's only the first hidden advantage. Now let me show you the second hidden advantage. It's something buyers almost never think about until the day they move in, which is peace. Imagine it's a Friday afternoon. You're sitting in your garden with your family, having a coffee, talking, relaxing. Now imagine hundreds of people walking past your home. Children running to the park, cars looking for parking, headlights passing by. Suddenly, your home doesn't feel as private anymore. That's why plot 20 has another advantage. Simply because it's situated far away from the busiest part of the cluster, which is of course means fewer interruptions, less traffic, less pedestrian movement, less noise, and ultimately more peace. And here is the interesting part. Peace isn't something you pay extra for on the launch day. However, it's something people they wish they had after moving in. And of course I understand every advantage has a trade-off, because choosing privacy usually means giving up a little convenience. Therefore, the real question, would you rather walk extra 2 minutes or giving up a little peace every day? If I were buying emotionally, I would probably choose plot 60. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you did the same, because it's close to the community center, close to the park, and close to everyday life. And on the launch day, plot 60 feels like the obvious choice. But architecture has taught me something surprising, that the best plots are rarely the closest to the amenity, and they are rarely the farthest away either. But the best plots are usually somewhere in the middle. In other words, close enough to enjoy and far enough to avoid. Because every convenience comes with a hidden cost. Now imagine it's a quiet Saturday morning. You are sitting in your garden with a cup of coffee, and instead of hearing the birds, you hear children playing, parents talking, cars searching for a parking, and people constantly walking past your home. That's not a bad design, but it's simply a consequence of being beside an active area. And that's exactly the trap. Because people and buyers notice the convenience on the launch day, but they only discover the consequences after moving in. Because luxury isn't just having great amenities, but luxury is having the freedom to choose when you experience them and when you don't. That's why the best plot isn't always the closest one, but sometimes it's the one that gives you the choice. By now you're probably waiting for me to tell you which plot is better, but simply I won't, because I believe that's the wrong question to ask, and the perfect plot doesn't exist. Every plot gives you something, and also every plot asks you to give something back, and that's not a flaw, that's architecture. Every great decision is really a trade-off. So let me ask you something. Which inconvenience would you rather live with for the next 20 years? Would you rather walk extra 2 minutes a few times a week, or dealing with more traffic every weekend? Because that's the real decision. Plot 20 sacrifice convenience to protect peace. On the other hand, plot 60 sacrifice peace to gain convenience. Neither choice is objectively right, and neither choice is objectively wrong. They are simply designed for different priorities. And that's exactly how architects think. We don't search for perfection, but we search for the perfect balance. Not the biggest advantages, but the fewest meaningful regrets. Therefore, don't ask yourself which plot is better, but ask yourself which trade-off I would happily accept every single day. Because simply you're not choosing a land. In fact, you're choosing the lifestyle that the land will quietly create. After reviewing hundreds of plots over the years, I realized something that completely changed the way I evaluate properties or real estate. Which is the best plots never have the biggest advantages, but the best plots simply have the fewest meaningful weaknesses. That's because people usually focuses on one impressive feature, but architects don't. We evaluate the overall performance, and by performance I mean how well the plot support everyday life over the property's lifetime. Think about it, a little morning sun, a little privacy, a little traffic, a little more green space, and a little more separation from the neighboring homes. On their own, none of these advantages seems dramatic or life-changing, and most people wouldn't even notice them. But all together, they quietly transform how a home feels every single day. That's why I don't judge a plot by its biggest advantage, but I evaluate using what I call the plot performance framework. The idea is simple. A great plot isn't the one with the biggest advantages, but it's the one with the multiple advantages reinforce each other. While of course the trade-offs remains manageable. Think of it like an orchestra. No single instrument creates a beautiful performance, but each instrument contributes a little. And when they all work together, something extraordinary emerges. And great plots works exactly the same way. And that's exactly the difference between buying a plot and understanding one. Launch day lasts one afternoon, but living in the property lasts for years or even decades. Yet most people make their biggest decisions as if only launch day matters. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes in real estate. Because before I compare any two plots, I need to answer two questions. The first question, what am I willing to optimize for? And the second question, what am I willing to sacrifice to achieve it? Because if you don't answer those two questions first, the market will answer them for you. And that's what exactly happened to most buyers, where they optimize for excitement. Things like closer to the community center, closer to the park, and closer to the amenities. But for me, I optimize for something very different, which is the long-term performance. Simply because I'm not buying a plot, but I'm choosing where I'll drink my coffee in the morning, and where my children will play, and where I'll come home after a long day, and where ordinary days becomes memorizes. That's why using the plot performance framework, I would choose plot 20. Not because it's perfect, and there is no perfect plot anyway, but because its strength quietly reinforces one another. And at the same time, its compromises remains manageable. Yes, I can walk or drive extra 2 minutes few times a week, but I can't move the roads, and I can't change the sun orientation. And I can't relocate pedestrian pathways. Those decisions becomes permanent. And I think that's where most people get it wrong. Because they optimize for what impressed them today, instead of what they will appreciate 20 years from now. And most people think they're buying a property, but actually they are not. They are choosing the environment that will shape thousands of future mornings, and thousands of future evenings, and thousands of ordinary moments that will eventually become their life. Yes, the villa determines how you live, but the plot determines how that life feels every single day. And that's why architecture isn't just about the building we design, but it's about how those buildings quietly design us. And through our lens, we don't chase the market. In fact, we decode the structure and position within it.